Welcome to Forthright. I'm Sulani Madsen, and here's the reader feedback, an additional commentary on my column published Thursday, December 8th in the Spokane Review. West Hill neighbors feel bypassed again. It looks like any other small town, bisected by a highway, then bypassed by a freeway. A couple of aging, early motoring era motels, an old gas station, a church, a few commercial structures, but even more vacant lots where buildings have been torn down. Ask an old timer, and they'll tell you about the days when there was a real grocery store, pharmacies, a florist, an elementary school, and one of the finest restaurants in Spokane with a panoramic view over the city below. A time when the West Hills neighborhood had a business district. The decline started when Interstate 90 planners neglected to provide a promised off-ramp to access West Hills businesses, according to members of the West Hills Neighborhood Council. Tourist traffic to the motels dried up. Low weekly and monthly rents became the norm. Whittier School closed in the 1960s and was torn down in the 1970s. Businesses gradually disappeared. The Sunset Bridge connecting most of the West Hills neighborhood to the city is literally falling apart. 2 lanes are closed. A sidewalk was barricaded after a chunk of railing fell into Hangman Creek. WashDOT spent $59 million on 3 roundabouts at the Geiger Overpass, but can't find funds to fix the bridge, said William Hagee, West Hills Neighborhood Council president. He's also concerned about the Rosamond Avenue and Lindicke Street bridges across I-90. Hagee made the WashDOT Fix Our Bridges sign for the protest organized by Save Our West Hills outside the building converted to house the new Catalyst housing program. The protest coincided with Governor A.J. Inslee's RSVP-only news conference at Catholic Charities' latest acquisition. The Catalyst, formerly known as the Quality Inn, was originally the acclaimed Spokane House. Mayor Nadine Woodward wasn't even invited. A governor traveling more than 260 miles to tour a key program in his plan to address the largest WashDOT right-of-way homeless encampment in Washington for 2022 and bypassing the mayor of the second largest city in his state can only be described as political petulance or poor planning. Hanging out with the protesters was a catalyst to learning why the West Hills neighborhood feels bypassed in planning their own future. They label us NIMBYs because we're opposing the catalyst, but we're opposing it on a number of levels, Hagee said. Their concern starts with the compression of social services into a single neighborhood, which Hagee describes as a violation of Growth Management Act principles and the city's comprehensive plan. With Catalyst this year and the new Agnes Haven apartments slated for 2023, the West Hills neighborhood will have 5 major Catholic Charities properties and more than 10 locations operating as low-barrier, transitional, or permanent supportive housing. The community is very well aware of what's happened downtown, said Hagee, referring to the expanded operations in the area surrounding the House of Charity. It breaks my heart. They have good intentions, but it just doesn't work out. The Catalyst project is located just west of Finch Arboretum, which Hagee describes as an historical gem where he spent much of his childhood. More caution is advisable these days. Neighbors say illegal camping has become a problem and they don't want to see it get worse. Jonathan Mallahan of Catholic Charities confirmed they have negotiated a temporary easement with Spokane Parks and Recreation to complete the perimeter fence along the Arboretum. He described extensive security precautions and staffing planned to identify and regulate guests in the Catalyst facility, but that doesn't allay the fears of neighbors who have seen how drug dealers have followed their potential clients to nearby low-budget motel housing. Predators always move with their prey. The Catalyst, being operated as a program rather than under Washington's landlord-tenant laws, might be the best protection for the neighborhood. Mallahan said Catholic Charities will carefully screen for motivated guests and expects to evict anyone who violates the terms of the Good Neighbor Agreement. Landlords, even nonprofit landlords, will tell you that evicting someone with a lease in the name of protecting the safety of other tenants and neighbors is extremely difficult. Neighbors see West Hills as a logical place for a vibrant, near-downtown urban neighborhood, the next Kendall Yards. But since 2 major nonprofits, in Catholic Charities and Empire Health Foundation, have bought up chunks of property, the momentum for private projects has stalled. We're losing an estimated $100 million worth of new development because they don't want to be anywhere near Catholic Charities properties, Hagee said. Private developers have tabled plans for more housing, mixed housing and retail, a restaurant, and a 3-story office building. Being bisected and bypassed was a tough blow. It's the lost opportunities to revitalize the West Hills as a full service neighborhood that really stings. That column came about because the governor was having a media availability and a tour of the Catalyst facility. It was RSVP only, but you could only RSVP if you were invited. The mayor wasn't invited. I am not on the governor's top 10 list of people to invite to a media availability, so um, I didn't get to RSVP either, which is how I found myself standing out on the sidewalk in bitterly cold weather, hanging out with the protesters. And it was a good conversation. I was so glad to be able to bring some visibility to that neighborhood, one that I had driven through for so many years. The first email of the day after the column came from Andrew. Said, "Thanks for your article on West Hills. All homeless decisions spark controversy, but the Spokane House was not the original name of the Catalyst." So Andrew is a decade enough older than me that he'd been through that neighborhood even longer before, and he remembered the original name of the hotel when it opened in 1951 was the Desert Caravan Inn, a name that I can only be presumed was selected during a post-World War II revival of 19th century Egyptomania. The hotel was built at the same time that U.S. Highway 10, now the Sunset Highway, first bisected the West Hills neighborhood as the major east-west motorway across Washington and onto Points East. The Desert Caravan Inn and the other small motels along the way were built to take advantage of that traffic. As pointed out in the column, West Hills Commercial District was bypassed completely when most of the original route of US 10 was incorporated into the freeway system, splitting off a portion of the community, which is now called the Grandview neighborhood and located south of I-90. The history of the area is important to understand. Finch Arboretum is an historical treasure, established in 1949, and if you've never been there, here's a few bits from their webpage. The landscape follows Garden Springs Creek and now contains about 2,000 trees and shrubs, including 65 groups of lilacs, as well as a rhododendron grove, conifer and maple collections, and a nature trail. The Arboretum lies in a small valley running southwest to northeast, carved by the creek. I-90 and the Sunset Highway, which use the valley to descend into Spokane from the higher elevation of the Columbia Plateau, respectively form the southern and northern borders of the park. The Arboretum is home to the Touch and See Nature Trail, which is owned by the local Girl Scout Council. Stopping at Finch Arboretum was a highlight of field trips to Spokane for my campfire girls, or at least a highlight for me. We'd be returning home to Reardon, and I'd let them run loose and explore for 15 minutes or so, and I'd enjoy the peace and quiet by the banks of Garden Springs Creek, and then blow the whistle and corral them back to the car. I'm not sure I'd feel comfortable doing that these days, probably with or without the Catalyst project in the neighborhood. There was a group of small houses, just a little bigger than today's tiny houses, in the area surrounding the Arboretum. It was a little housing development built up during World War II by the military. There was some barrack-style accommodations known as Victory Heights that had been torn down in 1953, but the Garden Springs bungalows were still there, and there was talk of tearing them down, but they were privatized. The property was turned over, and those homes were bought, and they're now a neighborhood of small and affordable houses with a great location next to the Arboretum. And there are still residents in the West Hills area that remember when the neighborhood had a commercial center and a school, and it could have them again. In fact, it surprised me to find that the kids in the neighborhood are bused all the way to Hutton, which is clear over, it's a long ways over on the South Hill, nowhere near this neighborhood. They're really, they deserve to have a school again. Hagee's memories of the Whittier School were of a pretty cool building, and been hard to find pictures of it. They seem to have been scrubbed somehow. But back to that reader feedback. Residents of Garden Springs area that are now included in the West Hills Neighborhood Council are understandably irritated at being ignored. The neighborhood is more diverse demographically and a little younger than the median citywide, slightly higher than median income, but a much higher proportion of renters. And that data point is critical. In fact, one reader wrote back and said, besides the Catalyst project, David asks, what are the others that you referred to in your recent column? So the four major programs that are run in the neighborhood are Catalyst, St. Margaret's, House of Charity, and Rising Strong. These four are all programs that are not subject to landlord-tenant regulations. Residents are required to participate in programs to help them, raise their level of skills to be able to be future good tenants and good neighbors of any from anywhere in any neighborhood. There's another housing project operating in the area that's called Ascenda. It's also an old highway motel converted to a sober living facility. There's a psych respite facility that's been built. There's several Catholic Charities apartment buildings and a series of other small motels that now take HUD vouchers, which serve the transitional housing market. So according to the fact sheet for the West Hills posted by the City of Spokane and based on 2017 data, so it's a little outdated, the neighborhood is 58.8% rental households, while the city median is 45.3%. And that was before a number of the current Catholic Charities projects came online with more rental households. And Catholic Charities is planning 2 more apartment projects in the neighborhood. So, we've all heard there's different stories about, how too many rentals affects a neighborhood. The research has really come to conflicting conclusions on whether a high ratio of owner-occupied to long-term renters is a problem for property values or neighborhood vitality. It depends on a lot of other neighborhood conditions. But I have regularly driven through the neighborhood coming in from the West Plains over 40 years, and I've watched the slow decline of the commercial properties along the old Sunset Highway. And I can't blame the neighbors for wanting to revitalize. And there is a difference between long-term renters who obviously do have buy-in to the neighborhood and participate in things like neighborhood councils and events, and transitional housing, which has people cycling through. And for any of those who live there, if there's no place to gather and even a coffee shop to spend money and to really knit a community together, those are all things that make it more difficult for a community to hold on to its property values. So folks in the neighborhood wrote appreciating the column, one saying he felt like they were being treated like the proverbial red-headed stepchild as an afterthought to the city council and to city planners. When Governor Inslee said at another recent press conference that the neighborhood had been consulted, I have to admit that I talked back to the TV. He sure as heck didn't consult the neighborhood on the day he dropped into the Catalyst project in an SUV with dark tinted windows. And not reaching out to meet with Mayor Woodward while he was in town was just petty, but it was his choice, and that says a lot about his character as a leader. Or, as Robert put it in his reader feedback, great piece today on West Hills and very informative on history of a beautiful part of Spokane. Shame on Governor Jay. So, thanks for tuning in, and boy, does that make me sound like an old boomer. I don't know, how do you say that now? It's not tuning in. Thanks for checking out the link. 2023 will bring expanded local news to this podcast, and I hope you decide to become a subscriber.